welcome to Season 4 of Hoda's Career Info, the program where career professionals from across the globe meet to empower you to succeed. My name is Hoda, and we have a special episode today with two career experts joining us, Nakaska and Dr. Rich Feller.
Career decision-making is one of the hardest questions that the majority of us are ever going to face in our life.
Passion is something you learn to move into once you have mastery.
We don't know how to be successful for us.
Most clients want you to take their chaos and give them language that gives them a sense of control and structure and hope.
Young people nowadays are 7 years behind in work experience to those of the older generations.
What do you want to invent, create, build, or fix in society?
Thank you for joining me in Hoda's Career Info, your career program where guests from across the globe share career tips and personal stories to help you successfully navigate your career. Watch, listen, and learn. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. And follow me on social media for more career info. More importantly, make sure you have that very important career conversation with a career professional. As I mentioned earlier, we have a special episode today with two career experts joining us, Nakaska and Dr. Rich Feller. Stay tuned for an engaging discussion where we explore the age-old question: do we need passion or purpose in our career lives? Discover the secrets of finding what truly drives you and fulfills your soul. Thanks again for joining Nakaska, Dr. Rich Feller, and myself in what promises to be an informative career conversation for everyone. Thank you so much, Nakaska and Dr. Rich Feller, for joining me today in Hoda's Career Info. I really appreciate your support one more time, showing up again on this series. And today we will be talking mostly about passion or purpose, or maybe not, depending on how you guys decide to respond to it. I'll go ahead and get our discussion going with the question: do you think we need passion or purpose in our lives?
Ian, go ahead.
Okay, sure. I'll start. I definitely think that we need purpose. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to know what that is right off the start, but I think it's important. What we've seen through anthropological studies is societies where people have a purpose, whether it's, looking after children, finding, and helping with food. Those cultures, the people tend to live longer. So that's information we've had for a very long time. So definitely, we need purpose, and passion is important too. The thing is, what I have found is that most of my clients don't know what their passion or their purpose is. And so they feel, like, oh, I have nothing to offer, or, I must be a big loser because I don't know the answer to this question. And the reality is that they're pretty much like everybody else. I mean, I didn't come truly to my purpose in terms of career development until later in life. My original purpose was raising my family. And I think that was a really important purpose. So I think our purpose changes, throughout our life, and we can be passionate about a number of things. But, the reality too is that a lot of people have passions that don't pay, and you have to feed yourself. You have to take care of your family. So all of those things are important too.
So well said, Ian, and I so appreciate your personal approach to that. I have very, very, very strong opinions about this. I think passion is frankly a terrible term. It's the first thing we ask about. It's the most useless question we can ask. And I'll tell you why. I spent a life building the career decision-making system has served 20 million people. And it basically asked, what are your interests? And if you look at passions, passions and interests often get collected. And I think passions are basically very seductive. They're not very helpful. And frankly, they're based upon a fixed mindset. It's like someday they'll be revealed. And when it happens, I'll stay with it and I'll find passion. I think that is totally not helpful. But if you look at many coaches, that's the first thing they ask. What are you passionate about? Frankly, passion is something you learn to move into once you have mastery. And if you think about the notion of purpose, purpose is to me, and I try to make things real simple, the default is, do I get up every day? Do I give and do I grow? And if every day I give and grow, I think I'm going to have a life that's full of meaning and excitement. And I want to experiment with a growth mindset. And when I find mastery and find that I'm belonging and I'm engaged, and I'm connected, I feel pretty excited and passionate about what I do. I often make the analogy, God, I think about all the women I was passionate about. And thankfully, things changed. And I settled on one person and she settled on me that allowed us to keep growing and experimenting and really finding purpose in life together. So I'm very outspoken. I think passion is a terrible word. There's some significant research to support that notion that it's very seductive. It's very helpful. And it really causes people to believe in what I would call, and many people would call, a fixed mindset. Like someday it'll be revealed. I think that's not helpful at all.
I do think that there are times where people do have a passion. And that's where Mark Savickas' work comes into play. I do think that there are those times where people have had a trauma or some life experience or some joy that has helped move them towards a career. So for example, maybe their mom passed away from cancer. So then that becomes their passion, is to help people solve that problem, because they don't want people to feel the way that they did, when they lost their mom. And so then that drives them. But what I find is that that's not a very large percentage of the clients that we work with. And we were talking a little bit before about JP and his challenge cards. Sometimes there are issues that people are very passionate about and they feel very driven to help work on those issues and those passions. What happens though is, I always ask the question is, what happens when you're healing, or what happens when you have completed that work? Then what? Are you going to be able to figure out what you want to do next in your life? Maybe you come up with a cure for a certain type of breast cancer that your mom had or whatever. But then what? Like, are you still going to feel driven and passionate about that work once you kind of have that answer? So I look at it in that way. And I think that we're motivated by a lot of different things. And so I've been doing a little bit of work on that, what I call the types of success and what drives people to wanting to be successful. And success looks like lots of different ways. And so because we don't understand success in more ways than just kind of financial and being, the CEO of a company or whatever, I think what happens is we don't know how to be successful for us. So for example, you could be the head project manager of building one of the biggest mega projects, bridges in the world. That's not being a CEO. That's, you might have financial success, but chances are you're driven by different things. And probably nobody even knows, your name, but you can still be very famous and very successful at what you do. And we don't talk enough about those different kinds of successes to help people figure out, like Rich says, how we can grow and how we can get up in the morning and work towards those things.
You can see I'm trying to create controversy by my high energy response. And you can see Anne is very personal, thinking about what it means for individuals. So I would say we're very similarly saying you need both. And what seems to be based upon research or generalizable to more people. And I mainly want to say, if we think about fixed versus growth mindset, if you believe passion is something that's revealed to you, you come from a fixed perspective. if you believe that your purpose is going to change, we call it capital P and lowercase p, that your purpose changes, but every day you give and grow. And I find from my own experience, asking people, and our field has been driven by what are your interests? Those are very narrow, very much shaped by experience, and create a real quiet tracking. So much of my work tries to take on those terms. Passion is not very helpful. Interest creates tracking because of your experience bias. And how do we help people think about the notion of purpose being getting up every day and giving and growing? And as Ann talks about, success is very personalized. I find the best answer for me is help people to think about what is their good life. And Richard Leider's work on the good life is fascinating because it allows you to personalize on significant variables that we all have to explore. So what a great question you ask, Hoda. And both are helpful. I just ask people to be careful about when they buy into things that are suggesting it's a fixed versus a growth mindset.
Do I have to go through a trauma in order to find what I'm passionate about? Or do I have to really care for someone and lose someone? Then I'll find that purpose or challenge. Is there a secret to find what truly drives me and fulfills my soul? How do I find that if it's not interest and if I don't go through a trauma?
Trauma, I think, has become a common buzzword now for most of our ills. And there's no question we've all know what trauma looks like and might have experienced it. But I think we've got to be making things simpler because most clients want you to take their chaos and give them a language that gives them a sense of control and structure and hope. So I try to stay away from diagnostics, and I've been trained in them, and try to get people to say, okay, where are we? And what do you want more of? And what do you want more of reveals a little bit of clarity about how they can begin to see, hopefully, something else there ahead of them. So I tend to try to be as simple as I can about this. And make language useful to them to help them explain and understand and gain control over their chaos.
I would tend to agree with that, Rich. What I think happens in our profession is we try and simplify a very complex process. The reality is that career decision making is one of the hardest questions that the majority of us are ever going to face in our life. And yet, we don't spend very much time on it. And I believe it's because we don't understand how to do the process. And so then I'll add in on some of the other things that Rich talked about. So I really like Bloom's taxonomy from the educational theory because it's about critical thinking, and career decision making is critical thinking. So what you have is you have Bloom's triangle. On the bottom is knowledge. And I think, okay, so know yourself and know industry. And I find we do not spend enough time talking about knowing industry. And that's a big part of my work. And that's why I got into it. We also need to know career development. We need to know about networking and how to do a resume and all of these things. So there's a lot of things to know. And this actually builds on Parsons' work. If you go back just to basic good old Parsons, he really knew his stuff. So then once you have a whole bunch of this knowledge, then you start analyzing it. And here's the third P that we don't talk enough about, and that's preference. So Hoda, you asked that question, well, how do we know and how are we going to find out and how do we figure this out? Preferences. If you ask the vast majority of preference, they know if they prefer this or that. Would you prefer to be a baker or a florist? Would you prefer to, work in the sciences or in the social sciences? Would you prefer to, work in the trades or work in the professions? Most people can answer those questions. And so then what happens is when we start to do that analysis work, that's where we start getting into the preferences. And I do a lot of analytical work with my clients around what their preferences are. And then we evaluate. And that's where the values come in. That's where things like, does this fit into my life? So the good life, what, Rich talks about. So maybe I have a preference to go into medicine, but maybe I don't want to go to medical school and never see anybody for however many years, or maybe I don't want to work those kind of hours so that I'm never around my family. So then we have that evaluation piece. And then sometimes when we're really lucky, we have what I say we strike career decision-making gold, which is the top of the taxonomy, which is creativity. And that's when you'll be interested in one thing, say it's accounting. So say I'm interested in accounting, But then I'm also really interested in tourism. And I go, you know what? I could do accounting in the tourism industry, and then I'd be able to travel and do these things, but I'd still be working with numbers. And so then it's like we get to collect not just one passion, but several passions together. Or we create, like recently, I worked with a client where they actually created their own position in their company. They were doing some negotiation work and they created a proposal to take to their organization where they would be doing negotiating for almost 100% of their time in their work. That's that career decision making sort of goal that we're aiming for. But it's like Rich says, where we're growing and we're working on the things that we like to do, that we have aptitude for. Rich talks a lot about aptitude. I think that's really important as well. I don't think we get enough opportunities to practice and try out skills. I compare, my husband who grew up on a farm and got a lot of competencies growing up on the farm compared to myself where I grew up in town, don't have a lot of opportunities, to drive the tractor and shovel bins or work with animals. And so what happens is I find we're losing that opportunity for competencies and trying out different roles.
Beautiful. And I can't speak enough for the power of experiences, trying things, doing experiments, just getting out there to get feedback. And I think I'm my own heretic anymore. I'm becoming very cynical about our profession. I tend to think we even have to get away from the word career and define it differently. It is so not just job. And I think we're seeing that more and more. And that's what I tend to define career as, really navigating a lifetime of life role transitions. And that to me opens it up in simple terms to take the pressure off a person to have an answer. Career really is navigating a lifetime of life role transitions. And even career, what are the roles that we want to have? Like, I'm not just my job. And if I'm a high school kid, I want them to say, you're not just a job, you have these other roles. And don't you just really want to get engaged, to belong, to get some feedback, to find a sense of mastery? To me, that's the best thing I can work for, to get someone to find. I've got two clients now, a junior in high school coming in tomorrow, and another gentleman, 66, is unemployed and has to work, doesn't have a college degree. And I'm just trying to start with basic principles to normatively say there's not a quick answer. Don't get fixed. How do we experiment, as Ann says? How do we get you to connect and network, feel like you belong, so that you can really recognize that we get most of our jobs through our friends and people. In addition, Ann mentioned Parsons, and I love that you mentioned that. Well, I actually went back and read his original work, and I am so frustrated that no textbook will be honest and really tell you his theory. They use the word abilities, and he used the word aptitudes. If you go back and look at his original work, he said aptitudes. He didn't say abilities. Abilities are learned and malleable. Aptitudes are the way our brain works and how we think. And those are our competitive advantages. And the reason I'm committing much of my life to use science is to say, can we give you new feedback about your competitive advantages, those things that always show up, and those are your aptitudes. And with those, I'm not trying to track you. I was tracked as a high school kid. I'm just saying, how do we give you feedback to get you to see these are assets you've not discovered? And what if you looked at where those might be used, you might find, wow, there's lots of stages upon which I can perform. Interests matter, but they're malleable and they're shaped by SES, your mother's reading level, and your zip code, which tells us where you go to school. And that quiet tracking from interest really is not enough. So we have to expand to say what also are your aptitudes. And I think that's critical. And for most people, I'm more interested in what are they going to do next? Because it isn't like we do something, even a college degree doesn't translate well anymore to a job. Only in STEM does that happen most often. So the question is, what are you going to do next to learn, get feedback, try out, experiment, as Ann says? And from that, we get a much greater sense of learning. And that's tends to be my approach.
I love both your answers. I have a quote from Dr. Michael Healy. We need to start supporting young people to explore their careers early on and often. How can we support students, if not explore careers, but to really get to know themselves?
I like to use the metaphor with my clients of a hotel corridor or like a cruise ship corridor. And I work with clients of all ages because I work on career decision making. That's my focus in career planning. So what happens is I talk about career exploration with all my clients because we often don't have that opportunity to do career exploration. So I say, think about this corridor with some of the doors being open and then all the rest being shut. So what happens is, what we're going to do for this next little while is we're going to go and we're going to explore some options. And it's like opening up some doors and then saying, oh, do I like what's in that room? And at the end, we might have opened up, another 20 doors or whatever, and you might not have liked anything. But the fact is that we looked at some more doors, and you can make those choices of, did I like something that I found there, or did I not? So that's one of the ways that I help people kind of visualize the career exploration process, because I want them to think about that they have a lot of closed doors, and Rich kind of talks about that, right? And then the other piece is helping students pay attention. So what I mean by that is, when you're in school and you're learning about something, so say you're learning about green technology, then go and explore that. If you were really excited about something your instructor or your teacher said, go and explore that. Who are the companies that do that? What kind of jobs can you get, the people that work in that field, so that you start to create a habit of exploring what you are interested in, because that's going to get you looking into different avenues and industries and companies and organizations. And if we start that training young and teach people how to do that skill, they've got that the rest of their life. And then the third thing, especially for high school students, that I think is really important is industry. So trying out different industries. The three of us know that different industries have different cultures. And also there's a lot you can learn in different industries. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a student and they're interested in working in the medical field. But, they don't get to go and try out being a doctor. But what could they do to give them a little bit of industry experience? So a part-time job that they could get is they could work at a drugstore, right? So in the States, Walgreens, CVS, and in Canada, London Drugs, Shoppers, whatever, right? And why do I suggest that? One, because there are pharmacists who are working there. So they would be meeting people in the medical profession. And they could, pharmacy might be an option that they never thought about. They would be surrounded in an organization where there are medical supplies. Shoppers rents medical equipment. So maybe they decide that, I'm interested in the medical field, but I thought my only options were being a nurse or a doctor. And then this allows them to say, you know what, I could be a sales representative for, the vitamin industry, or, or one of the pharmaceuticals. And so what happens is it encourages them to start looking around them, and that doing their job is not just doing the job. It's learning what other people in that job and that company are doing. So the more we teach them to look around, then they learn that skill. And what I would also recommend is that during high school, that they maybe look at working in 3 different industries. So doing 3 different part-time jobs for a year each, doing something in grade 10 for a year, then something in grade 11 and something in grade 12. That would give them that experience in a number of different industries, and would open their eyes to, a wide variety of jobs that are available out there. And so then they can start to see, oh, I have lots of choices, not I have like this little set number of choices.
Hoda, we've talked a bit. What are you thinking? Because you have so much wonderful experience as well.
Anne's answer, as usual, is perfect. We agree too much, perhaps, on our work. I had a young client. He was going to apply to the pharmacy program, and he spent the summer at Shoppers, and he realized that being a pharmacist is not for him. So he ended up and switched like 180 degrees to computer science. So that was the next degree that he chose instead of applying to pharmacy. And your response, Rich, how do we get to know our aptitudes so that we can choose these 3 opportunities? You really have to have had some sort of experience, as you mentioned, Rich.
Sure, it helps to accelerate exploration. And I think Anne has talked about it in another language, but the goal is to accelerate exploration so you have more to understand about all those rooms you walk down in. You see there's many more doors open. I think we have again, gets back to the fixed versus growth mindset. I think we think that there is a job or there's an industry. And I'm becoming less sold on that idea, saying it's really, as Ann talks about, you walk down a hallway of lots of doors. We have a couple of problems. One is we all have multi-potentiality. And I think we have to embrace that. That's why we have transferable skills, and we can. I'm amazed at when I watch clients who may not have started out well, including myself, and then done fairly well. So there's multi-potentiality. Secondly, people only know a few options. They can't name any jobs. They can't even name any industries. So they're undernourished vocationally. And even we struggle with some of the names of occupations. So that's another limiter. The other part is, how do you get better at knowing yourself or the system, as Ann talks about so well about industries? You frankly have to be exposed. You only can know what you know. So we made an assumption that we know your potential, you have explored enough, and we really have an idea of what occupations are out there. So what I like to ask high school students are these questions. What do you want to invent, create, build, or fix in society? And that makes it as simple as I can get it, because any high school kid, I think, understands those questions. I want to fix, my grandmother's been sick. That's why I want to look at medicine. I want to create something. I want to build a bridge. So make it as simple as we can to get them to begin envisioning what they think they can do, just so that they feel a sense of mastery. Like, think about how many times we tell our young kids, go get a summer job, and they cut grass in a golf course 4 years in a row. What a terrible way to explore occupations. As Ann said, try 3 different ones. I was most interested, Barbara and I were most interested in, how do we get Christopher to do things in the summer with really health, cool role models in whatever they do, and learn how to be a good person and keep learning and value decision-making and critical thinking and getting exposure. And my son's own story is a case study for what happens once we gave him feedback about aptitudes, because the school gave him great feedback about achievement, grade and rank and GPA and all that, which really has very little to do with what naturally did he have within him. And we found our son, and maybe you heard this story, went from basically studying business and finance and thought he'd be like his dad. And we found that one key thing from U Science, he had amazing sequential reasoning. And he then went into data science, which is built upon sequential reasoning. And now he does all the trades for the New York Knicks, and he's 31 years old. We learn from our own experience about how do we understand that most people don't know language for options. You have much more multi-potential than we think. And unless we accelerate exploration, we're going to be limited about what we think we even can be. So this is not simple work, as Ann said. It's really complex. But I think most clients want simplicity to feel that they're gaining some structure and some control over their chaos.
I think the other thing too, Rich, and I talk about this in my presentations, I really like that you talk a lot about jobs because I think the other piece that we need to really start working with youth, starting at youth, but everybody is going to need help in it, is more entrepreneurial learning. We don't know how to be an entrepreneur, and yet, that has been the trend. That is what's tracking both inside organizations. You're not going to have a job. You're going to be switched around in your role. It's like, okay, we need you, Rich, we need you to work on the math part of this project. Hoda, we need you to work on the people skills. And Anne, you're going to take this last piece. And then when that project's done, it's like, okay, well, now you're going to go and work over on this project, Rich, and Hoda, you're going to work over here in this group. And it's going to be much less about jobs. The problem is that we keep everybody in both HR and career development, we still keep talking about job and job search. In fact, job search comes up way higher in search engine optimization than anything that has to do with career and career development. That's why I think stuff in our field takes so long for people to find it, is because job is what everybody knows. When people come to see me, they want to start working on their resume right away. And it's like, we haven't figured out what you want to do. How do we know how we want to slant your resume? And it's like, but that's what they're taught. So they think job. And the reality is that jobs, that's like way back second industrial revolution stuff, when we went from being artisans and craftspeople, and then we started working in factories, and we started making widgets and stuff. We started doing jobs. And I think the reason that people like jobs is because they're secure. If I get a good job, I don't have to think about this awful process of career decision making over and over and over again in my life. Because if you talk with most people, they will tell you, and I joke with my clients all the time. I say, well, job search sucks. And they go, yes, it does. Oh, yeah. Well, there's a lot of anxiety in that. There's a lot of anxiety figuring out which job you want to do. There's a lot of anxiety and, going through that interview process. So that's why I like to work with the career planning and career decision making, so it becomes broader and a longer range. Where do you kind of want to start heading longer term, like growth, like Rich talks about, so that people can not just focus on, this job. And if I don't like this job, well, now what do I do? So they can go, oh, well, I could go look for another company, or I can, take a few skills and then do this. And then that's going to get me to where I want to go.
One of the things I'm doing a better job with my clients is I'm trying to figure out, are they coming to me with a sense of urgency, or are they coming to deal with developmental issues? The single mom who needs a job tomorrow to pay the electric bill to keep heat on for children, she doesn't need to learn about developmental issues. She's got to get a job tomorrow. The 66-year-old man who's retired and has a lot of wealth and has no meaning, he's looking at, how do I develop my whole sense of who I am now that I lost my identity? So even teaching a client about urgency versus development gives me some room to say, where do you want to go and what will you co-create with me? So I think that's one point I'd make. The second is that I've tried to define job. If you got to talk about jobs, I want you to talk about purposeful commitments. Like, what commitments are you going to work with within this bottle they put you in called a job? What's the purposeful commitments? Because that's really what gives you a sense of community, engagement, and meaning. Because if we live on purpose and we're learning and growing every day, what's happening at work that's causing you to learn and grow every day? The other thing about job search, I try to get away from the topic sometime and say job search is like going dating. And you find a date and you find a person by increasing your probabilities that you can add value to an employer. You increase the possibility of meeting people if you're looking to date by increasing the probabilities that somebody finds you useful and has value to their life. So if we take it out of just jobs, how do you increase probabilities you can add value either to relationships or to the employers trying to hire you? And I guess I would say, to me, so many people are locked into the urgency issue because they need a job tomorrow. I appreciate that. There's things we can do. And there's something developmentally that might be needed to help you get to the job, but how urgently are we talking about what you need tomorrow? In some ways, if we look at job searching like finding a partner, how do you come across attractively to add value to something? That's what an employer is looking for.
Because if you know what you want in a partner, whether it's really for personal or professional, then it's easier to find that person.
And so I'm so grateful. I had more than one date because the first person I was passionate about, oh my goodness, life would be hell now if that was the case. So we do know that accelerating exploration, getting experience, experimenting, trying to meet more people increases the probability you'll find more of what you're looking for. But how can you know what you're looking for if you have no exposure to things that are out there?
I like to think that by our conversation, we're telling them to really think ahead and plan.
I think so. Sometimes too, I think, there's that old question in where if you change the question, you change the answer, Beautiful. Right? Appreciative inquiry. That's what I'm thinking of. So change the question. So when I think about when I was younger, we weren't asked, what's your purpose? What's your passion? We were asked the question, how are you going to support yourself? That was the big question. How are you going to support a family? How are you going to contribute to society? So it was very outward focused versus very inward focused. And the reality is, if you go back to Basic Parsons again, he says, knowing yourself and knowing industry. So he says it's both equal, right? And so I think we need to start asking people more of those questions, and that's what JP's challenge cards do. They say, what issues do you want to work on? I ask people, where do you want to put your energy? You're going to be working 40 hours a week or more or whatever. What industry do you want to bring your energy to? What do you want to, like Rich says, what do you want to help build? And so I think that's a part of the equation that has really gotten left out with career theories over the last, probably 20 years. They're important theories because it's about, knowing yourself and understanding yourself better. But what we've lost is because we've kind of said, well, Triton Factor was too just, you do this and this is the industry, and now we've got you together and here you go. And that was never Parsons' work. Having it that simplified. You do a questionnaire and then it tells you that this is the job you're going to do for however long. It's more of a starting point, and that's all it's ever been. And so what's happened is industry, I found, has been left off the table, and we don't talk about how do you want to contribute. And that comes back to what Rich talked about in bringing value to an organization.
One of the things that I see myself as really is I'm paid to be a full-time student. And recently I've joined a new effort called Talent Intelligent. Some of you, and this really comes from Anne's idea, that we spend so much focus on the self and too little about the problems and adding value in society. That's easy to explain. Most of us in this business don't come from industry. So we have this self-discovery bias, a humanistic psychology bias. Wonderful, good stuff. Jim Bright, I think, actually creates a middle for that idea that there's chaos between that interchange. Unfortunately, we think all theories are equal. Like, I'm always puzzled in any textbook, they go over the 6 theories. It's as if they were all equal. Are you kidding me? Maybe so. It's like puzzling. So I've been studying and collaborating with this company called Talent Intelligent, if you care to look it up, where they say, let's take a look at the roles that we play. And let's take a look at the behaviors we have to practice based upon research to be successful. I mean, it's another way to look at this. And I love how they've identified individual contributors, managers and supervisors, and leaders and high potentials. And these are some of the smartest researchers I've read. And if you look at, you may have thought about Lominger's research or the Center for Creative Leadership or Korn Ferry. These gentlemen have now created something called Talent Intelligence. Say, what are the roles an individual contributor plays? And then how do we begin to rank those to say, what do I need to do in this role? And what learning tips do I need to get better at them? So we take a developmental perspective about how do you become better at your roles? Secondly, they say, what are the behaviors you need to really be successful in these based upon research? Because now they got all this data. So I'm switching my model and spending a lot of time with this project around Talent Intelligent. Like, we know, for example, that as an individual contributor, the 3 most important roles we have are get things done, work smoothly with and through others, and use resources timely and effectively within budget. Those are, frankly, roles you're asked to play as an individual contributor. That's not a role we ask really for a manager or a leader to play. So I'm trying to help high school kids think about the roles they don't even know the language of roles. They don't have exposure to them, but they're simply fairly concrete based upon research about, here's the roles you're going to play as an individual contributor. Learn the language, look at people who are doing it, and what behaviors do we know you need to get better at those. So I'm trying to, again, be somewhat cynical about our profession and move us closer to what Anne's saying is, let's pay attention to what industry says that they need and give language that's simple to the consumer so they really sense a bit of control over their chaos.
Really, it's about teaching the students the language, the career language that they need to know in order to know what to look up when it's time to do that and how to handle these situations.
Yeah. And some of it in the issue, why they don't have that knowledge. I remember at one of the NCDA conferences, they talked about, somebody was speaking about the different demographics, and they talked about how the young people nowadays are 7 years behind in work experience to those of the older generations. Like, if you ask the older generations, when was their first job, they're talking about, being 11 or 12 or whatever. And so that work experience has been put off. I know a lot of parents go, well, I don't want my kids working because I want them to just enjoy their youth or whatever, which is great, but then they miss out on that experience. But the other piece is that we don't teach business in school. And I'm not saying redesign the curriculum, because people get very upset when you talk about switching academia to business. But I think it's really important that high school students have one business course under their belt, including financial literacy, before they leave high school. And I believe that everybody in university should now also have to take one business course, and these are with case studies, so that you have to think about, what price am I going to price my product at? What will happen if the government raises taxes? What does that do to my price on my product? What happens if, the oranges freeze in Florida or whatever? How is that going to impact my business? We don't have that experience as young people. A lot of people or a lot of children in other cultures get that experience because they grow up in their family businesses. We're not doing that here. We don't have that. So all our young people are at a disadvantage globally, and we now work globally. And so we need to think about how are we going to start inputting that information to our youth and, and older, because now a lot of my generation, they don't have that experience either.
Beautiful. I used to be an admissions counselor early in my career. And you know what the number one variable was to pick the top student? They were an Eagle Scout. Why? Because they had documented through badging that they had experiences in life. Isn't that interesting? Eagle Scout was like the highest thing you could find about a person applying to school. Secondly, if you look at the research on entrepreneurship, in the old world, what were the two best indicators that you had an entrepreneur? You either had a lemonade stand or you delivered newspapers. And that's not as easy today, but that's interesting to think about. And then answer the other one, what's the big one? Well, what do your parents do? If you don't see your parents working, you don't have an idea about how to get mastery or how to connect to add value that is tied to the economic system. If you grow up on a farm and your parents are really exchanging goods all the time, you understand business way better than if you're someone whose father and mother goes to work every day and sit on a computer, you know nothing about what they do. So then it gets back to Ann's key point. How do we accelerate exploration to get a variety of experiences and understand that you have to, frankly, get things done through other people and with other people on time within a budget? If we can understand that alone, what I find intriguing is some elders don't know that. And yet some people who maybe had to work in a fast food chain and learned a whole lot about that. A story I can share with you because it's very amusing. I took a sabbatical once and I worked in entry-level jobs to try to study youth unemployment. And I remember going to McDonald's and I said, managers only one knew who I was. I said, I don't care. Anybody know about my background? I just want to apply for this job, get it, and see what happens. Okay, so my first night, they send me downstairs with a videotape to plug in the machine to learn how to work the window. And I said, oh, great. I can be on the window. I don't have to deal with customers. Nobody will really embarrass me because I'm scared shit. What's going on happens. You know what work the window meant? Because I didn't know this. Right to the front window. So when a yellow bus comes up with football players on Friday night, they could care less about who I was or my degree. They wanted to know they get the hot French fries and get their money back. But if we don't get experience, how do we really know to understand, as Ann says, entrepreneurship and adding value? And if we don't give people a variety of experiences where they can experiment and learn and get feedback and fail with some support, no wonder they have such limited exposure about what it is they want to do. Which gets back to your key question. How do we talk about, is it passion and what is purpose? It's both of those. But how do we accelerate exploration regardless of age for people to get out and see they have multi-potential, they don't know many options, and they've got increased probabilities of someone to find them that they have the ability to add value.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. Perfect. You wrapped it up and put a nice little bow on it. It was perfect.
This has taken us all back to we need to do this well in school, and many kids are not engaged in their careers yet until they get to grade 12. School's almost over. In my utopia, let's have that conversation in school as early as possible.
I try to watch trends as Ann does. You may know the gentleman, Brandon Bastide. He came through Gallup and then he went to Kaplan. He just left again and is now starting up a new program. I think Ed Build, I think it's called. But basically what he's saying is he understands that regardless, he went to Duke. You've got to get people to work on real life problems, to be as close to the business mentoring as you can find to really add value in the workplace. So he's shifted greatly and now joined an international company and going to take a look at the premier brands and how do they have in-house training to get people the skills they need. So it's something to pay attention to. And what I find intriguing, he's frankly brilliant. He's probably the biggest voice out there about disrupting education. He's saying, I got to find a way to give people more experiences closest to adding value to the problems they want to solve and closest to good brands to know how to do it. That's worth paying attention to. Yet we live in a place where we're giving parents choice of where they go to school, at least much in the States. And we have built schools so large that we standardize the process. So that's why only some kids fit in well. On the other hand, I was at a comprehensive school the other day, and they're going much more to career pathways in that they want to get people experiences related to pathways so they can accelerate exploration. And any vocational training that doesn't teach the person to be the owner of the company is probably short-sighted. So those are some comments we all might think about as we try to help high schools improve.
I would tend to agree. And it comes back down to the, that entrepreneurial piece. So I always think about bridges, the quote I give, at the beginning of all my presentations. We have to stop thinking about jobs and we need to start thinking about the work that needs doing and how do we set ourselves up to get that work done. But the reality is we are not taught that. And because we're not taught that, it doesn't happen. The other thing too that's kind of interesting as well, if you think about it, is that if you're the kid nowadays who has the lemonade stand, or I think back my kids' era, selling pogs in the playground, whatever it is, where you have these entrepreneurs. My youngest brother was a real entrepreneur, and he had all these entrepreneurial skills. Where do you get marks or affirmation about your entrepreneurial skills in school? We don't get marks for selling. We don't even take courses in selling, marketing, any of those things. And yet they're just a huge, big part of business. And yet, how would you know or understand that you're good at that? It's the same. I had a client who was incredibly high social, like on Holland's codes. Where are her marks in school to tell her that you are amazing at being a social person? So she came out thinking that she has no skills because she never got any marks for what she was really, really good in.
Thinking of the lemonade stands of today, I think a lot of kids nowadays are doing their own like YouTube channels and then trying to promote them. So I think that's a good way as well of getting that a bit of that entrepreneurial experience.
That's an upside. And I think social media, we can all poo-poo it, and the research is pretty definitive about how much too much of it can do to us. But the question is, what have you learned that you can transfer and translate to something else? It's that inability to translate what you have into a story that adds value to something outside of that narrow job list that you're looking at. I often find with parents, what I can say to them is, tell me about your career progression and how did it go? And what did you learn from that? And they're going to go, God, it was chaotic. It was random. It was through networking, got jobs by accidents. My degree didn't really matter. I mean, I'm overgeneralizing, of course. I say, okay, if that's the case, be 14 today. And what would you want your child to do? And usually comes back to feeling good about themselves, being good with other people, knowing how to get resources, trying to get some things done, back to those roles we talked about that I think is really helpful. So I think the lessons learned from parents are what they haven't listen to themselves about. And when they tell their story, they realize how complex the whole process is. And that's what I think is critical. And for me, and I think two of us, we also go through a series of transitions. I'm going through one, you're all going through different life role transitions. The question is, how do I translate my past into something that will add value in the role I'm taking on? And I'll be promotional here. That's why I love Mark Franklin and the work I'm doing with him, to take a look at storytelling and making meaning of experience. As Dewey said, it's not the experience, it's the meaning we make from it. And if I can't make meaning from my college experience that adds value to the future, it's going to hurt me in getting a new job as well. So how do we take a look at that idea of making meaning? The other part is I'll promote youth science. What we try to say is, here's some additional feedback that you should include, because we can say to you, if these are some tendencies that you have personality-wise, and you've also performed this that you can do the rest of your life, how do you bring those together with some confidence that you could use them the rest of your life? I'm now mainly working with 50-plus people and putting these concepts to them in a program called OSHIF. OSHA, it's a program across the North America where you bring 50-plus people together from this major foundation. And I'm further convinced every day that 7-year-olds, 17-year-olds, and 71-year-olds are all similar. They're looking for the same things. And those people who are able to navigate their transitions at 7 or 17 do it much better at 71. And I'm struck by how many people at 71 goes, I really hated my job. I didn't come with purpose every day to work. I did it to make a living or pay the bills because I never knew what to look for. And I got stuck in something because my financial needs had to be met. So let's back that out. How do we find a way to get people to find mastery as many places as we can, to understand the value of working with and through people, and frankly, meeting time and budgetary restraints so that we can live the kind of life we want, that every day we get up for giving and for growing. And I thank Richard Leiter every day for teaching me that.
Such an important vision and goal for all of us within the field. And did you want to add anything to what?
Yeah, I did. A couple of things. I wanted to just back up one on the parents, asking parents, how did you make your decisions and stuff? I think a question, so this is all about questions. So what are some of the questions that we can be asking clients? So I think it's important to teach students and young people that when they get asked the question, what do you want to do? And there's so much pressure. Everybody wants the answer before they've actually had time to go through the process. It's not fair. That is just so unfair to young people. So we need to teach them to say, I haven't decided yet, but I'm curious, how did you decide what you wanted to do in your career? So that they learn how other people made good decisions or not so good decisions. And that alone will help so much of their own career decision-making process. And then, to build on a lot of the stuff that Rich has been talking about, and what are the skills you can kind of use moving forward. The 4 foundational questions that I always ask my clients when I first start working with them is, I ask them on a scale of 1 to 10. Number 1, do you like the industry you work in? It's probably the first time they've ever even thought about, what industry am I even in, let alone do I like it or not? Number 2, do you like the company that you work for? Number 3, do you like the job, the actual job that you do? And number 4, do you like the people that you work with? And you can separate that into like 2 sub questions of 1, do you like your peers that you work with? And 2, do you like your boss? And what that does is it helps people start to do that analysis of Bloom's taxonomy. And you go, oh, so I've had clients who have figured out they didn't need to work with me. They were happy in everything they were doing. They only had 7 years left to retirement, but they hated the boss that they had. And they made the decision, why am I throwing away my whole entire career that I love because my boss is a jerk? So they decided instead to figure out how to work around this terrible boss than to give up their whole career and change their career. The other thing is when you learn those questions and you ask yourself those questions over and over again, is if you're happy and satisfied in your career because you've met a lot of the criteria that you figured out that you want in a job, what happens if all of a sudden you find a year later you're not as happy in that job? You can ask yourself those questions. So you're probably still working in the same industry, you're probably still at the same company, but maybe what's happened is some of the people that you were working with left because work is continually, transforming and changing. And so then what happens is maybe you figure out, I really like this industry. I really like, a lot of things in the company, but I'm really not liking the people that I'm working with anymore. And maybe I need to go and work somewhere else where I like the people more. Or maybe what happens is you like your industry and you like really what you do, but you don't like the company that you're at. So then you need to change companies. And so it really helps people start to analyze and break down that, what am I feeling unsatisfied about? What am I feeling disengaged about?
And those are beautiful questions. I'm going to steal. Those are wonderful. Thank you very much.
Okay, just give me credit.
Well, I'm just thinking of this client I'm going to work with, this 66-year-old man. I mean, those questions really be helpful. And 2 things come to mind as you said that is those questions also, well, they could get you to be in a valence of negative or positive. The real issue is, what do you want more of? Mm-hmm. From those questions, can we talk about what do you want more of moving forward? We know a lot about the brain and thinking positively and all that. So what do you want more of as a result of your answers? The second thing I would say is, remember, Tom, that where you are right now is not where you're going to be in 3 years. And neither is the company. So while this is a terrible chapter right now, how do we learn more about yourself and increase your transferability, translate and make meaning of the experience? Because in 3 years, those people aren't going to be the same people. You're probably not going to be in the same job or maybe even the same company. So where you are right now really stinks. And let's recognize that where you are is not where you'll be. And that seems to take the pressure off of this sense of urgency that I've got to leave tomorrow, which is really often a very dangerous thing to do.
Well, the other thing is too, is lots of people think that they oftentimes have to, it's like, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to go back to school and I'm going to have to redo my career and all of that. And, so the simple example I give is I have an accounting background. I was a joint venture auditor in oil and gas. So if I had asked myself those questions, I would have said, my industry is okay. I liked actually lots of things about my job. But I wasn't really all that, and there's that word, passionate. I wasn't really all that interested in the oil and gas industry. Now, if somebody had told me back then, well, Anne, have you ever thought about being an accountant for a new build, like a home building company? Because I loved construction. I love blueprints. I had been looking at blueprints and designs from since grade 8. And I love the construction industry. If people watch my trends and stuff, they'll see that, I talk a lot about the construction industry. But I was thinking, well, I don't want to be a carpenter, so I wouldn't go into construction. So we have these very limited views, right? Or I love the travel industry. I could have gone and been an accountant with a hotel chain or an airline or something else in the travel industry. I never, ever thought of that. I didn't have to change all these things or my training or anything else. I could have just shifted industries into something I was more interested in.
I know you want to close soon, but I just love how we got back to the word passion in the last response. I was thinking that maybe the word is not passion or interest. It's where am I most alive? Like, what are you alive about? Because we want people to work for companies and stimulate capitalism and all that. I want them to be alive.
Yeah.
And when I feel alive, I'm probably interested in something. I might get a little spur of passion with that. So I think the word is alive. How are you alive or come alive? And then I'll tease you, when you talked about you really used to like plans and blueprints. You science would have told you very early on you have great spatial visualization aptitude.
Yes.
I'm loving this conversation, but we do have to wrap it up and I have to let you go. I know you have other commitments. One more comment or tip from each of you so we can wrap it up.
You know what? I would love to do this at NCDA because that would give us the audience right there. And I think it would really spark a big discussion, especially having, a panel discussion versus, a presentation as such. So I'm going to throw that out to you. That's how I'm going to wrap everything up.
A great idea, Anne. Rich?
And I want to thank you for what you do, because more than anything, it helped me learn from two other amazing women and get my ideas together. And we tend to think in our brains before we say them in our loud sometimes. And Anne, I think what you've done with your last journal that you edited and what you brought to the field about industry and understanding work is so pivotal. I'm just feeling grateful for what the two of you have done from my own learning and for the opportunities you prepared. So thank you very much. This has really been fun.
Thank you. Well, and you have, your work all the way along. I still remember you being on panel discussions at NCDA and being introduced to your work. And I attended a lot of your PDI sessions on STEM careers and everything. And those little nuggets that I got along the way inspired the work I do today. So, your work has reflected back to you. And Hoda, I love what you do because you just bring so much passion to the career development field. And I think this and what you do is such important work. So thank you for asking us to be here today.
This is it for Hoda's Career Info, the program where career professionals from across the globe join me to empower you to succeed. Our guests today on Hoda's Career Info were Anne Nakaska and Dr. Rich Feller. You can connect with both guests on LinkedIn. Remember that you can watch Hoda's Career Info on YouTube or listen to the episode on your favorite podcast app. To let me know if you are interested in an opportunity to talk about your work, you can send me a direct message on my website, rightcareerfit.com, where you can also sign up for my newsletter to stay up to date on the latest episodes. Please like, subscribe, share, and follow me on social media for more career info. I am your host, Hoda. Until next time, remember, that your time is valuable. How are you spending it?